What happens if you take 2-inch precipitable water amounts, mix it with outflow boundaries, and a moist fetch of warm air coming from the Gulf? Well, you get unstable conditions like what we have today. Some thunder rolling out there as I record this. This is the precipitable water map in that entire lavender area right there. That's going to be 2 inches precipitable water and above. And it appears some of that moisture has made it all the way into Pennsylvania, West Virginia with the northward movement of Fred. Let me bring this up to the current time. Yeah, there it is, stalling out northeast of Pittsburgh at this hour. That's it right there, showing up just barely on the isobaric analysis. However, around it, a very large plume of tropical air all the way up to the Dakotas, all the way up into Canada, and up and down pretty much everywhere east of the Rockies. Embedded in that, we've got this large outflow pool from successive days of thunderstorm activity, and that's the reason we're getting some of that thunder outside as we speak. Also, an unseasonably strong cold front coming through the central Rockies into the Great Basin area. Look at those temperatures. Wow, 54 up there north of Salt Lake City. And we've got 65 around Reno, and even north winds in the San Joaquin Valley. 78 there at Sacramento this afternoon. And even more impressive, look at those 40s in western Montana. Wouldn't you like to be there? Well, we're going to take a look at those records in just a bit, but let's head north. Yeah, we don't want to forget our friends up there in Canada, and we could have a few viewers up there in Alaska, so let's take a look. Well, that warm sector moving up into Quebec and into Labrador once again, and we see the return of 90 degrees at Goose Bay, 86 in Newfoundland, so it's kind of crazy that it's hotter there than it is in Texas this afternoon. However, to the west, lots of cool air coming down through the Hudson Bay region into the prairies. So temperatures in that region mostly in the 50s and 60s. And then up to the northwest in Alaska, an unseasonably cool day, 43 there at Fairbanks. That's going to be a late morning temperature. And this very strong cold front coming through the Northwest Territories into Yukon and Alaska. So even though we've dealt with a lot of heat this summer, things look a little bit different this afternoon. Some records expected to be broken this afternoon in terms of coldest high temperature for the date. Great Falls, expecting a high of 54, which is 6 degrees, of their record of 60, which was set in 1956, and also possibly a record cold day for Flagstaff. And for overnight tonight, possibly up to 144 stations approaching, tying, or breaking their hottest overnight low. And you can see that correlates pretty closely to the position of the tropical air. 74 at Richmond, Virginia, tying their record set in 2019, and records could be broken at Poughkeepsie, expecting 71 tonight. And this other station, I've never really heard of it, but it's in South Carolina. And we can see lows along the Gulf Coast expected to be close to 80. And it is getting active out there in the Atlantic as far as tropical cyclones. Fred, the remnants right there, maximum sustained winds 25 miles an hour, central pressure 1013. That's pretty much normal sea level pressure, and moving northeast at 20. We've got Henri out there, kind of wandering out there in the Atlantic, 55 knots on that, so that's a high-end tropical storm, moving kind of like that. And then we have Grace. That's right out here. That's a low-end hurricane. I should say, NHC was originally expecting it to take a track kind of like that, but they adjusted that further to the west, and that's expected to cross the Yucatan and into the area around Veracruz, Mexico. And there's the track on that. Yeah, that got a thunderstorm rolling in right now. Really glad we're on an ups here. Hurricane making landfall there around Cozumel, re-emerging out into the Bay of Campeche, reestablishing itself as a hurricane during the day on Friday, and then coming ashore, producing a lot of rain coming inland. So in Texas, we had a lot of convection in the north part of the state and up towards Tyler and Waco. That's been moving northeast during the day, and we can see new storms establishing themselves in that tropical return moisture, just filling in right there across East Texas. So quite a bit of activity out there. Not much for West Texas. Looks like typical August weather. There's the past 15 hours of satellite activity. Henri out there in the Atlantic and Fred crossing through the Appalachians. And there goes the remnants of Fred, pretty well-established dry slot coming northward across West Virginia, and that brings us up to the current time right about there. So no significant hurricanes out there in the Atlantic. Henri, of course, is a tropical storm at this moment, and Fred is dissipating. Interesting weather in California this morning. We start out with the infrared channel about 5 or 6 a.m., and you can see the hot spots indicating the fires. So that's the old Dixie Fire right there. New fire near South Lake Tahoe, and then the other stuff up in the northern part of the state. Now, we do have that front sweeping through, north flow coming into the area, and as we get into the dawn hours, very spectacular wave cloud right there. This is associated with that jet stream and stronger upper-level flow coming in from the northwest. And this is bringing the circulation is bringing the smoke southward. So San Francisco, Sacramento getting a huge chunk of that smoke, and a lot of it just kind of filters down the San Joaquin Valley and the coastal regions. The strong pressure falls inland are bringing that marine layer pretty deep into the valleys of Los Angeles and San Diego. Look at that right there. Los Angeles located right there. Riverside, San Bernardino out to the east, and that stratus and stratocumulus is just right up into the mountains and into the canyons. So you don't see that too often this time of year, but it does happen. And further east, looks like an active monsoon, not quite out in the deserts of Arizona, the low deserts, but definitely up in the higher terrain. Looks very active all the way up into Utah and eastern Nevada. And there's a look at Montana and Wyoming. This is definitely a frontal system, and we're getting to that point where we're going to have to start revisiting baroclinic systems and baroclinic leafs and all that. Let's zoom that out a little bit and check that out on infrared. And that's a classic system right there. You can see the S shape on the back side indicating the influence of the jet stream. So we're getting more into a dynamically driven system here, fueled by the contrast between cool and warm air. And we'll run the satellite loop, and you can check that out. That's it right there. The southern end associated with the cold front, and the north end associated with the warm front and the warm air advection coming in from the southeast. And putting it all together, there's the initial mid-level mid-tropospheric chart. That baroclinic leaf pattern was kind of oriented like that, and we had that jet stream kind of punching into the backside. So that is a very common presentation on these systems, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of that as we head into winter. Out to the west, there's the main low-pressure system. That's a cutoff low, maybe more of a split flow pattern there. Oh, that's a close one out there. So that is a cold core low. That's barotropic, and we would expect to see a very low tropopause and cold conditions in that with great potential for showers. So it is still early in the day, but we're talking about this area here. This is where the upper level low is. You can see a lot of cumuliform clouds and some stratified altocumulus, that kind of thing. But as we get the heating working on that air mass, it should rapidly destabilize, and we could see some showers in that area. But if we look at SPC, slight risk for Utah, so they're focusing mostly along the cold front there and not so much on any activity back there with the cold core low. The Aviation Weather Center at aviationweather.gov, that's a good place to pick up surface charts up to the minute, hour by hour. And even though I put out a program called Digital Atmosphere that does similar charts, you know, I'll share this with you. It works pretty well and has its own advantages. So we're going to use that here, and I want to show you how to pick out these outflow boundaries. So we're looking at Texas, and we can see temperatures are in the 90s through Austin, San Antonio, and all those areas. And there's also a very warm area in Louisiana, 92 over 76, 89 over 78. So when we analyze this, we're kind of finding the northern limits of some of this activity. So you can see as we go north across this zone, we bump into 82 over 78, so much cooler. So that's rain-cooled air. Same thing going on in Houston. Here's a little wedge of warmer air coming up north, some 82 over 75, some hot air coming up into Longview, Tyler. So as we go through this, we can kind of maybe pick out where the warm air is and where the cool air is. And gradually, this kind of gives us an idea where the outflow boundaries are. Something like that right there. So you can go in and augment that with your radar data and sometimes your satellite data. I don't think satellite's going to help us out too much today because of the extensive anvils. And you can kind of go through that and work your way eastward, for example. So we pan up there to Arkansas, some rain-cooled air across much of the state. You can see that right there. And down to the south, wow, some very warm air. 94 over 72 at Jackson. 95 over 75 at, I don't know what station that is. But similar conditions at Monroe, Louisiana. And you can see there's even some northeasterly flow in the cool zones. So that would indicate maybe something like that, a little cold pool spreading out, and some very cool weather up in this region. So this would indicate maybe some sort of outflow, maybe in this area right here. And those outflow boundaries, they do tend to move often southward, and they can be a focus for additional development. So I might be concerned about potential for thunderstorms in that zone there. So that's kind of how you nowcast this from hour to hour. You keep close tabs on those boundaries. In fact, here's another good one. See that right there, dividing that 75 over 73 from 90, well, I wrote over it, but I think there's a 95 over 73 at Muscle Shoals, 88 over 73 at Huntsville, so that's a huge difference in air masses. So we're talking about north central Mississippi up to the northwestern corner of Alabama. And if we look at the radar, yeah, that correlates pretty closely to our active convective zone. So there it is. Those storms obviously love to form along those boundaries. And if you're ahead of that on the surface analysis, then you're ahead of the curve. And yes, satellite will help you to a certain extent, except where you have clouds covering the area. So satellite works best for the pre-storm phase, like morning and early afternoon. But you've really got to get in there and use the localized sectors. So you want to use something like this to be picking out the boundaries. Let's run that back. And here's that critical zone as the convection, the cumulus begins blooming. That's right there. That's probably about the best time to be looking for boundaries. In this example, we're talking about 11 a.m. And I can see there could be something in here, maybe something right there. In fact, that looks like some old convection right there, and maybe some stuff here. So those are the things you're going to kind of go through and compare with your surface data, compare with your radar, Radar often does show these boundaries. And then as things heat up, you'll often see some reinforcement. So right in here, this is obviously cool air. There's not much cumulus developing within that. And here we've got a very congested area of cumulus, so very likely some sort of low-level convergence is helping to focus that. So probably the boundary at this stage is running about like that. And possibly something up here, possibly something in here. And that's the kind of stuff you're looking for. You can see underneath here, it's clear over Arkansas at the low levels, but I'm not sure whether that's due to a cold pool or due to the cirrus suppressing convection. And that's the kind of stuff you have to figure out. So I hope that helps you, especially as we get into the remainder of summer. You'll be using these techniques a lot when you nowcast during the warm season. And if you want to learn more, a shameless plug for my weather forecasting handbook. It's got a chapter in there about surface analysis and covers a lot of what you need to know. And I should mention that printing is starting to get expensive. It seems like everything is getting expensive all of a sudden. So our prices are probably going to be going up on some of these books in the near future, maybe by fall. So this is probably a good chance to load up on books while you can. That's at weathergraphics.com. You can get this book and severe storm forecasting and some of those other titles. So check it out. And of course, that's one other way you can help support the program besides doing Patreon. And for those of you doing Patreon, I certainly appreciate it. And speaking of patrons, I do want to thank David Abrahamson. Thank you for helping us out. Okay, so we'll see everybody once again for our Friday edition. Until then, have a great Wednesday evening and take care. Bye-bye.